All right.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning for some of us. Welcome everyone to the largest and fastest growing and probably one of the most active meetups, large-scale Scrum meetups in the world. Globally, we are here to entertain you, organizational design, system thinking, and product centricity, and descaling are our main focal points, have been since 2015, since we started. Today we have a very special and very remote to many of us guest. I will probably mispronounce his name as much as I'm trying to do it right, and he will correct me later. Lou, right? For many of us that are used to a particular way of spelling, two letters like L and V together next to it doesn't sound very phonetically singing, but you can correct me on this. I know you go by Lou. So I'm honored to have you here because the subject we're about to discuss today, you are one of the best go-to people as far as I know globally. And so just to be fair to the speaker, a very, very long track of work in the product development space. Started probably as far as back as 2005 at Nokia Networks, in Scrum and large-scale Scrum, has worked side by side with Boss and Craig, Boss Vogt and Craig Larman, the co-founders of LeSS. Also, he's very, very, very few certified LeSS trainers with the Scrum Alliance. He's in China, Lou's in China. So this is a big, somewhat unique asset to have. And I will not be serving if enough justice given all of the Lou's credentials here, but he's also with Adi company, and this is the one of the companies that is like a foundation, the milestone for learning of large-scale Scrum. And I guess you can tell us more about your history if you'd like to. But today's conversation will be around product centricity and product centric companies, and we shall be leveraging Lou's deep expertise in system thinking and system modeling to unravel this topic. So exactly, product development at organizations, as far as I know, and my personal experience a lot with large banks, insurance companies, pharmaceuticals, there are a lot of omissions and mistakes that organizations make when defining products. So approaching this from a system modeling perspective could be a very powerful way to to discover those omissions and perhaps discover better ways to define products for customers and users. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the control over to Lou. Let me make you our host for that matter. So I'm still recording and you own everything else. You can own the screen share and stuff like that. So off we go to you.
Okay. Thanks, Gene, for the introduction. And my name is Lu Yi. So Lu Yi is my surname and Yi is last name. So just call me Yi. It would be very easy. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Right. Okay. Perhaps I just share my desktop and yeah. Can you see my sharing with this keynote?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share this topic about practicing system thinking in product development organization. Actually, there will be two parts. So the first part would be about the context in which we practice system thinking. So I would like to first set the kind of big picture. Practicing system thinking is only one part of that, or it happens within a big context. So that big context is very much about the learning organization. So I would like to make the connections between like LeSS, learning organizations, system thinking, or other five other disciplines coming from learning organizations. So this will be the first half. Then the second half will be more specifically about introduce system thinking in product development organization. So this is actually kind of my view of LeSS. I call this Stairway to Learning organization. And by the way, I didn't draw this picture, but my daughter drew it for me a few years ago when I applied CLT. So one of the requirements is that every candidate trainer need to submit a graphical representation of LeSS. And this is what I submitted. And I asked my daughter for help. I told her that I want to have a stairway. The starting point is LeSS, and the end point is learning organization. So I will explain that a bit more detail. So let's first take a look at the kind of description or definition of learning organization. And this comes from the book, The Fifth Discipline. Personally, I feel that this description is a bit verbose and it's a bit difficult to capture the essence or main points behind that learning organization. So I kind of summarize on my own and for my own learning and understanding. So I see this as learning organization. There are three aspects. So the first aspect is about vision, and where you can see that here there's it describes that people need to know what they truly desire, what they would like to create, and they need to have a collective aspiration. So those are vision aspect in my understanding. And the second aspect is about learning. You can read people continuously expand their capacities. That means learning. People are continuously learning how to learn. So we have so-called double loop learning here. And the third element or third aspect to me is thinking. It describes new thinking and the expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured. So that's the thinking aspect, vision, learning, and thinking. So that's the essence of learning organization to my understanding. Then there are actually 5 disciplines supporting these 3 aspects. If we look at, first look at the vision aspect, there are 2 disciplines, personal mastery and shared vision. These are associated with the vision aspect. So personal mastery is very much about personal vision, individual vision. And then we kind of synthesize individual vision, then make it shared vision. So this is these 2 disciplines are really supporting the vision aspect. Then this learning aspect, there are 2 other disciplines which are mental models and team learning. So in team learning means kind of group learning. So the team is not necessarily team in Scrum and LeSS context. Team could be means the whole organization. And the mental model helps team learning actually go in a lot deeper. So challenging own assumptions and beliefs. So this is about mental model. And then the last one, so the third element, third aspect is about thinking. And then we have the 5th discipline, which is the system thinking, to support that part of the learning organization. So this is my view. And if I say the endpoint we would like to achieve is we develop more and more organizations into learning organization. And we use LeSS as a starting point. So now I need to explain that part of thinking. So why I think LeSS is a starting point. If we look at this LeSS complete picture, we know that in LeSS, when we're talking about LeSS, it could mean the framework, rules. It could also mean the whole picture. So when I say LeSS as a starting point, I mean more the framework. So the framework is the starting point. But to me, what's more important in LeSS is not really a framework, but also about these experiments. Because if you are familiar with the first two LeSS books, and it's full of experiments, more than 600 experiments. So we start from those rules and frameworks, but then we use the experiment to break the rules and create our own rules. So this is really the key. Through the experiments, we learn better, and we refine our thinking, and we think better, and gradually we move towards learning organizations. And what do we learn from the experiments? In the first two LeSS books, actually all those experiments are described in the format of trying something or avoiding something. But I found that a little bit misleading, because to me, what's really essential about experiments, or what can we learn from the experiments, really about those reasoning. So when we say this experiment is to try, let's say, try one product backup or try feature team, it would be easy to focus on that something. But to me, that misses the point. So we need to focus the reasoning, meaning the variables, factors, dynamics behind that something, so that we learn about the logic and reasoning, and we get insights from those experiments, and we get to the understanding from those reasoning, and then we need to think on our own to come up with meaningful experiments in our own context. So this is essentially what I'm saying is we need to shift from more like copying mindset to learning mindset. So through that, we can really develop ourselves into learning organizations. So I would like to actually draw a bit. So do you see my mirror board? Yeah. So just summarize a little bit about what I have been sharing. So this is like if we have a stairway, or it's a kind of light version. Here's a LeSS, and the endpoint is learning organization. So when I say the starting point, this is really the framework or the rules. But the key to help us move from LeSS towards the learning organization are experiments. Then if we think about product development organization, so that's a specific type of organization. If we think about experiments, actually we have at least two dimensions. So one dimension is the product. So we can experiment on product, and we can also experiment on process. So this is what I'm going to share next. So how can we, what do we experiment with? How can we find opportunities to practice those 5 disciplines, including system thinking, in a product development organization? So by the way, when I say experiments, I kind of expand its meaning. I would say, when I say we experiment on product, actually, this is not probably very familiar or common term that we use in our work. In the work, we usually call we do feature, we develop a feature. But in my view, feature is a kind of experiment on product, because we don't know whether this feature could help us build a better product or not, or whether it will help us achieve the business goal or not. So essentially, those are also experiments. And when we have experiments on process, we probably also don't use that term, experiment. More often, we use the term as like improvement actions. But those are all experiments in my view, because when you make improvement actions, you're not certain that this improvement action will definitely solve your problem. It's just a hypothesis. It's an experiment to run. So I use these terms, experiments, features, improvement actions, rather similarly, because I feel that the essence is the same. But the next part, I will elaborate this, how we can experiment in the context of product development organization. So in the development organization, product development organization, actually, if we are doing iterative product development, we already have a built-in mechanism that can support us to do the learning. So there are two dimensions. As I just mentioned, actually there's a product learning and process learning. If I draw this kind of normal sprint cycle, right? We know that every sprint provides an inspection and adoption points for product and also for process. So if we look at the product dimension and process dimension respectively, we will find that actually these 5 disciplines like vision, learning, and thinking, there's already built-in mechanism where we can take advantage, we can expand. So if we first look at the product dimension, like we have product vision, right? But does that mean if we have product vision, we already have shared vision in product dimension? Not necessary, right? So if a product owner in Scrum and LeSS, the product owner provides this product, owns the product vision. But how much shared is this vision? That depends on how product owner actually share this vision. If the product owner just tells everybody this is the product vision, it's even though that it is a vision, but it's not very much shared. So, but if we move up this ladder, like in the beginning, this by the way, this picture comes from the fifth discipline book too. So as the initial starting point, the product owner probably just tells everybody this is the vision. But then gradually he can share more by selling this vision, saying that this is our vision, this is the rationale, why we come up with this vision. Then even further, he can start to test this vision. So this is something that he invites everybody to validate whether it makes sense for everybody. And up to consulting, meaning that everybody can start to contribute and give the inputs to the vision. Eventually, if we start to co-create that vision, and essentially product owner becomes more or less a facilitator to gather everybody and co-create that product vision. So the thing here, the point that I would like to make is, we once we have already have this product visioning exercise, I think that's a very good starting point for us to move gradually towards shared vision. But that happens in the product dimension. As we will see later, the vision could be on product, could also be on process. But if we continue the product dimension, then we will see the team learning discipline, so one of the 5 disciplines. On product, we sort of already have that event. When do we do that product learning? In iterative development. We do that during the PBR, product backlog refinement, and sprint review. Think about a feature. If we look at the feature as one experiment on product, this will mean that during PBR, when we look at this feature, then we first need to make some hypothesis. How is this feature supposed to solve this business problem or user problem? And if we can make that hypothesis explicit, then after we've developed that feature, we can start the learning process. We can start to collect the feature feedback and data and look at our initial hypothesis and to validate or falsify it. So it's sort of already built in that iterative development cycle. And this is a one team environment. If we change that into multi-team environment, then the PBR becomes multi-team PBR, and that sprint review for that specific team becomes the whole product sprint review. But the essence remains the same for team learning on the dimension of the product. So this is a product dimension. But if we look at the thing about the process probably is a bit too limiting. So here, what I mean is really the product development system that create the product. So we need to learn about product. Then we also need to learn about the system that create our product. So sometimes we use process or team vision or organizational vision, but that's more or less the same dimension. So here, who gives that vision, like organizational vision? It may start from some leader or some change agent. But how much shared is that vision? That depends a lot how we create that vision. Like if a CEO of the company has that organizational vision, we would like to develop ourselves into a learning organization, for example. If he tells everybody about that vision, then that's not very much shared, right? So we still need to move up that ladder from telling everybody, just then selling everybody by explaining the rationale and testing it, consulting it, and co-creating. So eventually, if we get into a stage where we invite everybody to co-create our organizational vision, for example, then it becomes very much shared. If we have that vision in place, then we can start our learning process. And process or team learning and very much integrated embedded in the sprint retrospective, right? So during the sprint retrospective, if we try to learn or improve our process, we come up with some improvement actions. But those improvement actions are essentially experiments as well, experiments on process, right? So during the sprint retrospective, if we do plan, do, check, act, then initially we will make a hypothesis. So here's the problem. Here's the improvement action. Here's the logic. Why we think this improvement action will lead to the problem solved. So by laying out that rationale or reasoning behind that improvement action, then we start to do that. After doing that, we will check a result to see whether it validates or falsifies our initial thought. Then we act. So we can apply the team learning on process during the sprint retrospective. If it's a multi-team environment, it becomes team retrospective plus overall retrospective. But again, the essence of process learning remains the same. after sharing this, you probably wonder whether if we are doing iterative product development, we have PBR and sprint review, we have a sprint retrospective. Are we already doing all those 5 disciplines? Yes and no. So on the surface, we are already sort of doing that. But the team learning in learning organization goes deeper. I think the main difference is really the depth of learning. Whether we just take a look at this, we just can casually collect feedback, casually think about improvement actions, or we really do that in a more disciplined way. Then it will go to mental models, whether we challenge our assumptions and beliefs, whether we aim for double loop learning. And then it goes to the system thinking where we, by which we look for more like interconnections. We see the big picture, we see the long-term effect. I think that's the main difference in my view. So sort of we already have those 5 disciplines, at least as a kind of light version or initial version. Then we can take advantage of those existing mechanisms, meaning PBR, sprint review for product, and retrospective for the process and organization improvement. And we expand those events to include more deep learning and including the system thinking. So this actually provides a context in which we talk about practicing system thinking. So when do we practice system thinking? We do that on product during the PBR and sprint review. When do we practice system thinking for process? We do that during the sprint retrospective and overall retrospective. So this is the context. All right, since we will move towards more specifically about how to introduce system thinking. So any questions, any comments? Jin, if you see any questions coming up through the chat, then this is probably a good time to pause and share some comments.
I'm going to encourage folks, thank you for this. I'm going to encourage folks to mute yourselves. Ogden, kindly ask you to mute yourself. You keep making these background sounds. But if you have a question.
Still making a background noise? I was actually going to make a comment.
All right, so if you have a question or a comment, please go ahead, for sure, before I had to mute you. Because... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, this is great stuff from what I'm hearing. What I'm thinking is kind of the parallels with really anything in life, right? Even let's just say the quality of me taking a step back, and you know how we prepare or plan for things, or a checklist of what I need to improve on when I do my self-reflection as a person, right? The quality of time is a lot more important than just arbitrarily using the time, right? So the quality of time you use in anything, including this, is a big realization, right? Not just holding a retrospective, as I'm sure many of us have worked with many teams, but the quality of and how seriously they take that is kind of the key to the deep learning we see here, right? So part of it is the tools and techniques that we use and the intent we have. So even if we had the intent, right, we might not have the thinking tools, for example, causal loop diagramming, right? Or other type of tools for that. But you can't just have the tools alone and not know what to do with it either, right? Or not take it seriously. So that's kind of what I'm gathering here, right?
Thank you for your comment. I think that because if we look at causal loop diagram or system thinking as a separate thing, then it's very difficult to make it sustainable. So so we need to find out leverage some of the existing mechanism. That's my experience. So I feel that it's good to kind of find some built-in mechanism, and we kind of stack these things on top, it gives us a much higher opportunity, probability to make it stick. Anything else? Okay. Perhaps I move on. Then we can hopefully by the end of the session we still have 5-10 minutes to have more conversation. Would that be good?
Go ahead. No.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So now let's talk about more specifically how we can introduce the system thinking for learning. So here, again, this learning means on both the product dimension and process organizational dimension. So firstly, here I would like to clarify a bit. So when I talk about system thinking, it's I'm actually only mean the system modeling with CLD. It's only a part of the system thinking, but I use the term system thinking and system modeling rather interchangeably. Here's my view for system modeling. I tend to look at this with two levels. One is kind of individual modeling exercise. You can do that on your own. And another level is we can do that in a group. So when you do the individual, talking about individual level, then here's the three main things to me. So the first point is we focus on reasoning about causality. So this is to be strict, if strictly speaking, it's not even part of the system thinking. It's just logical thinking. It's a basic reasoning. But I found that very important and worth highlighting because that sets the foundation. Sometimes we feel that we already good at reasoning. What we need is only to kind of adding loops on top of those links. But in my experience, it's not the case. Quite often we need to, we don't have a very solid foundation. A lot of times actually we try to improve or strengthen our thinking, basic thinking, reasoning ability. And here what I mean, if we're connecting that to the causal loop diagram, here what I mean is really about some of the basic things. For example, how do you name a variable? And because the naming of the variable, it really helps us clarify a lot of thoughts. During our normal conversation, we use lots of fuzzy terms, which if you put them or turn them into a variable, you discover that it has lots of meaning, different meanings behind. So this is the first thing, reasoning about causality. But once you have that solid foundation, it gets a lot easier to expand that into system modeling. So that goes to the second and third point. The second point is about expanding time and space. As you probably know that when we are talking about dynamic complexity, meaning that the situation where causes and effects are distant in time and space. So how can we deal with that dynamic complexity? Then we expand time and space. So we do that on purpose. Sometimes I say, I often use that analogy of zoom in, zoom out. So this is the time that we need to zoom out. We step back and we see more things. So we on purpose, so we ask questions about like what happens during the past year. If our initial thought is focused on the past week. Actually, there's also a very simple system thinking tool called behavior over time, which helps us to extend the time dimension. And looking at space, it's more about, think about from others' perspective. If we are initially focusing on our team, then we may ask that, what would other teams look at? What would the other organization look at? And by doing that, meaning expanding time and space, then we see some mutual causality. We see and more things in that one picture. So meaning mutual causality here is really, sometimes causes become effects become cause. And essentially connecting that to the causal loop diagram, that's a loop, right? So we do that expanding time and space, we're adding more things, we see more interconnections, and we will see loops emerge. Then essentially we are doing system thinking, system modeling already. So this is three main points to me when we practice system modeling. Then if we do, that's like whether you do that individually or in a group, this is all relevant. But when you practice system modeling in a group, then I would like to add one more thing. That is balancing, advocacy, and inquiry. So when we do that in a group, I always emphasize one thing and one thing only. So I insist that everybody needs to comment around the model. So I take that model as the common pool for our dialogue. So if you are familiar with the concept of dialogue, there's a concept called common pool. So everybody just add your ideas into the common pool instead of you try to argue something to win your argument, things like that. We just add stuff into that common pool. Then the model actually serves as this common pool. So when we advocate with some reasoning or a point of view, and I ask that person to try to reflect that addition to the model. If you are not comfortable in working with that model, but then others can help you. If you just explain your reasoning, then others can help extract variables out of your reasoning and reflect that into the model. And when you make an inquiry, and you need to make sure that you point at which part of model you are commenting, like which is variable you are talking about, which link you have a different understanding or experience. I feel that by doing this advocacy and inquiry connected to that model, that creates, firstly, a more focused conversation. But more importantly, this really helps us, challenge our behavior. Yeah, actually, beliefs and assumptions. So actually, kind of expose your assumptions through that system model. So this is what I have been focusing or highlighting when I facilitate any system modeling session. And if you're new to this system modeling, and actually there are many good materials available, like if you want to read a book, then you probably could start from the book called Seeing the Forest for the Tree. That's a kind of a guide, manager's guide. I think the subtitle calls a manager's guide to system modeling or system thinking, something like that. And if you want to read some articles, or actually, I have this very small book. It's called System Thinking Basics. So if you want to start learning about causal loops, this could be your starting point. I personally also wrote a system thinking primer, but my kind of additional contribution from this is to add more examples from the domain of product development, hopefully filling up the gaps so that you can start easily, because those examples would be familiar to you if you are working in the product development domain. Recently, I found that it's useful to make the distinction between practice and performance. So one of the struggles I have experienced while introducing system thinking into organization is if you apply system thinking directly in the work, you always face that time pressure. Because initially you are not very fluent yet with this tool and system thinking, system modeling, but then you are dealing with a real topic. And that time pressure really is not good for the learning system thinking itself. So I started to introduce a separate dojo. By the way, practice and performance means that practice is focusing on improving your skill. Then performance, we apply that on in the real work. So like in sports, we probably spend 90% of our time in practicing, and then we spend 10% of our time in performing. But in our industry, we usually don't make that distinction. But I found that it's good to make that distinction and at least spend some time for practicing in narrow sense, like doing the dojo. So I would like to elaborate a bit how can we practice in the real work? As I said, our skill is improving. During this time, how can we kind of balance our not very skilled yet this system modeling thing and with real work? So let me draw that. So, oops, sorry. So suppose that we have all the experiments. So as I explained earlier, so what do we experiment with? We experiment around features and we experiment around improvement actions. So suppose that we have lots of features and improvement actions that we can apply system thinking, meaning that before developing a feature, you apply system thinking and you do the system modeling to illustrate how this feature can contribute to our goal. And we can, before taking that improvement action, we apply system thinking on this to illustrate how this improvement action is supposed to solve our problem. Suppose that we have 100% of those experiments. We can start, let's say, 10%, meaning that we pick up some features or some improvement actions. We practice the system modeling around it. And then we leave 90% of those experiments in the old way. So we don't deal with that. Then that gives you a balance because for that 10%, you definitely need to spend more time. And that's a challenge, right? So we kind of start from a small part and gradually expand the scope. We take more, right? When do we do that? We do that during the PBR for the features, right? We do the initial system modeling for those features before we start developing them. And we do them and we update our model during the sprint review. When we collect the feedback and data, we update that model. So that happens for feature as the experiments, then that happens during PBR and sprint review. For improvement actions, that happens during the retrospective, right? But we only take 10%, for example. I have been thinking about this approach, and I found that this could work, but it's a bit slow. And because you kind of leave 90% of those experiments out of your scope, right? So I actually think of a kind of light version of system modeling. So if this 10% is a kind of full-fledged system modeling exercise, well, can we introduce some light version, meaning that it's easier than full-fledged system modeling, but it helps us closer to the full-fledged system modeling. So I found one. Actually, I found two. One for product dimension, one for process dimension. So what are the light version? So I found that impact map or impact mapping could serve as a light version of system modeling. I'll explain why in a moment. And I found that root cause analysis could serve as a light version, or actually in my blog post, I used the term stepping stone. So they could be stepping stones towards full-fledged system modeling. So this is what I'm going to share next. If you are familiar with impact mapping, then you know that this is essentially just a structured mind map. We have a goal, and we have like who will impact this goal and how their impact happens, and the deliverables and features. So to me, the essential thing here is create that causal link between the feature and the goal. So that helps us establish the causality. And remember that the 3 points behind the system model and system thinking. And the first point is reasoning about causality. I find that by doing impact mapping, we can focus on that single point. So reasoning about causality. And if you have this link, causal link, say we have a feature called push update. How does that contribute or impact the goal of growing mobile advertising, right? So if we do this impact mapping, with that impact map, it's very easy actually to turn that into our initial causal loop diagram, actually without loops, right? So here, if you see, this is we have number of push updates. Here's a path, causal path towards the revenue from ads, right? We can add as many variables as we would like to have to clarify the causality. Of course, this is a hypothesized causality. We need to do that. And after that, we get back to this model and have the further learning. But I found that if we can, if you are proficient with this impact mapping, that provides a very solid foundation for you to move further into the system modeling. And we just, kind of expand time and space, right? And we see more interconnections. Sometimes effects becomes causes, right? Then we see loops emerge. So this is what I have been recommending for people to start doing impact mapping on product, acting as a stepping stone towards the system thinking. Then let me also share very briefly about root cause analysis. So this is another kind of light version of system modeling I discovered. And this is a sprint report. This is the plan part. We have 5 sections for plan. And here's one concrete example talking about adopting unit test. And here's the theme. The theme is about adopting unit test. And the background section explains why we need to do that. So explains the consequences of having that practices. And the third and fourth section, current condition and goal, basically explains the problem or defines the problem in terms of gaps between current condition, current reality, and the goal. And we have a root cause analysis with the fishbone diagram, right? So what's similar with this root cause analysis as comparing to the system modeling is again the causality, right? We first focus on the causality, establish the causality, and when we do this good, then we can gradually move towards a system model. And for example, we can turn this background part, meaning the effects, into causal loop diagram, right? We adding more granularity into our thinking, and we can grab some related variables. And for example, this is motivation aspect, then we group all those variables and we expand time and space. We see more interconnections, and gradually you will see those loops emerge, then you gain more insights, and so on. So I don't elaborate those in details because you can always refer to my blog post. By the way, I have a slide for references. So all the details regarding like how you can convert impact map to causal loop diagram, and based on that, then you expand, and it's you can read more details from those articles. But I would like to summarize here. So when I think that the summary goes something like this. So we start from less rules, and we experiment towards the learning organization. Then these experiments, we can integrate all those 5 disciplines around the experiments. And for product development, experiments are in 2 dimensions: product and process. This is the place where we practice system thinking. We can do system modeling for some of those features or improvement actions. But there is also lighter version that we can start practicing. We can take only 10% of those experiments, practice system modeling. We can tackle more of them in a lighter version, meaning impact mapping and root cause analysis. And gradually, we practice system thinking in full scale, and adding more of other disciplines. We gradually evolve ourselves into a learning organization. That's it. And so I'm sorry that I almost use up all the time, but we have like 3 minutes. We can have some comments and some exchange.
Thank you very much, Lou. Yeah, folks, we got a couple minutes remaining. Feel free to ask questions. I'm sure it's a handful. Yeah. Anyone?
When you introduce this to your organization's management that you work with, how do you first introduce it? What was the effective way of getting them on board, I guess? Is it just similar to what you've done here today, or is there like what's been difficult about getting them on board with actually doing the systems thinking exercises themselves?
Quite often I start with like if I happen to have the opportunity to give them CLPs, and that's probably the initial place they learn about and experience about this modeling. And quite often, I think that it's relatively easy to get them inspired. I would like to have a try, but it's much more difficult to get it sustained. So meaning that integrate that into the real work. Then we're talking about real work, and every now and then, I focus on three things. The firstly, I try to get opportunity to run those dojos.
One second, Andre, you may want to mute yourself when you're not speaking.
Okay, so the first point is I would like to, if find opportunity to run those dojos, but that could be a regular event. You can integrate those things with your existing like brown bag launch and so on. That's one thing. The second thing is I every now and then I use like retrospective or find some features that if I get this opportunity to together with them practice system modeling, that would be great. But I find that quite more often what happens is actually I use more and more the light version. When I use the light version, I don't even mention this is a stepping stone towards system modeling. I just introduce them, we need to do some impact mapping to make the connections between the feature and our goal, or we need to lay down our logic by doing some root cause analysis. I found it's a lot easier to help them get started. And over time, in my experience, sometimes they will discover on themselves, they say, this is very close to system modeling, actually. Especially when they do impact mapping, sometimes I say, you don't need to make it very strict, just do it freely. If you want to add more variables, and you just explain your logic, and over time you find that this is already a COD. So that happens.
Wonderful, thank you, appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Well, folks, I guess Louis, we want to be respectful of your time. It's the early part of your day, and you probably need to get going and do some work, right?
Yeah, I'm fine. But yes, we need to. I'm available this morning. For me, morning. So if you're interested, I can hang out for a bit longer. Then we can.
Sure. So, folks, anyone has any questions for Louis, if he's willingness to give us a few extra minutes, we can take those. Also, his information, his contact information, and the session will be recorded and freely available to all of you. You can reach out to Louis directly.
Thank you.
More questions? Any questions?
I have one. James here. Lou, I was chatting on the side with someone here, and in order to be a learning organization, it seems that you kind of have to unstick it first. It would be nice if you could get everybody to agree that we're going to transition to some structure that has better incentives and all of that. But it seems that the status quo power structures will prevent that from happening unless some senior management, makes that opportunity to change. So, which is really a form of coercion early on. So, but once you get past that and you kind of get unstuck, then I could see how everything you're saying makes so much sense. So I'm just curious how you respond to that. And
it's I always say that it's kind of lucky that you get to work with some organization would like to really challenge itself and continuously improving towards a learning organization. So sometimes I just feel it's more about kind of this change thing. So to me it's I always try to find the art of the possible thing, right? So sometimes it's just I feel that like by introducing impact mapping and root cause analysis, and those other kind of small things, stick them into the existing way of working, and it already helps there for the current reality. But over time, and when they are kind of more ready for the next step, then I add a little bit more. And probably at some point, I will mention the learning organization thing. So depends really the context. Sometimes I bring up this learning organization idea immediately from the very start, and got some excitement. I see that a good thing, but I don't also overrate that thing, because that even though that initially we are able to unstuck, and in my experience, it's always like back and forth thing, and in reality, so it's yeah, it's I now I more and more think that it's really starting from somewhere, and don't overrate the initial kind of buy-in or support from senior management. I found that my experience is that even though that they are very excited about this and they would like to kind of push that towards that direction, I almost have no experience that it could sustain itself. It's always like it gives you a good start, but there's a kind of a mismatch between the excitement and the real work. In the real work, it's anyway takes time to gradually see things differently. So this is why I come up with those light versions for them.
But I noticed that you started from less. You didn't start from waterfall moving through less and then to a learning organization. You sort of made the assumption that we're going to do this reset from, you didn't even start to the left. You kind of, that was kind of where I was going.
Yeah, actually less, I think that less is really, if we are able to make that structure change, then that really provides a very good foundation for the rest, because we have already like talking about team learning, we need to have a team, right? So that kind of, if feature team definitely helps a lot to for that team to see the big picture, because they already responsible for end-to-end feature delivery. But if you start with a component team or a functional team, then it's a lot difficult, even though that you have those techniques in place, but that setup limits themselves, right? So, I see this is what I see here is really about the group of people that you practice system thinking. If we have adopted LeSS, then that's a feature team and a bunch of feature teams sharing one product backlog. So if we have that, great. But otherwise, I feel that team could be if thinking about product and process, right? Then the product meaning the feature experiments on product. So if we have a component team, I wouldn't introduce the product learning with this component team alone, because that doesn't give people the incentive to look at that whole thing, to experiment with that. But I probably, if we don't have that kind of feature team set up in place, then I just use feature group, even though that's not ideal. But make sure that that group of people and connected with the learning. I know that sometimes you don't get people who have the incentive to learn about those things. That's difficult. I don't know how to deal with that. But if some group, either it's a feature group or feature team, then they're ready to give it a try. Then I always look at that entity connected to the thing that we would like to learn. Like if we're talking about improvement actions, if this is really a more systemic improvement action, we probably just grab the people from wherever they are in the current organizational setup, and then connect that to their systemic improvement action. So this is what my approach is. I agree that this is not optimal, but if people see, sometimes it's just which one to start. I mean, first have the right organizational setup, then you apply learning with that entity. That's great. But other times we just need to work kind of across the current organizational boundary, but connect that to the learning that we would like better.
I have noticed that all of these techniques, fishbone, causal loop diagrams, you name it, they're all very sensitive to having people with the right knowledge in the room. If you have an imbalanced group that doesn't know about, you only know about part of the elephant, it doesn't work. You have to have, the technique is great for creating a commonality, a common mind, but you've got to have the people brought to the table that can see the whole elephant, so that you can then have them educate themselves or educate each other using these techniques.
Indeed. I think that if this is why if we can start from less, it's really great, and we have a much better foundation. But otherwise, we need to work kind of across this organizational boundary and find out the people who have that knowledge, and also willing to reason about the causality. I think that this reasoning about the causality is really one of the keys for the deeper learning.
Yeah, I would agree. And I wasn't even saying that necessarily in a LeSS context or not. I mean, even in a LeSS context, you could have some problem that you need a real customer in the room to help understand, right? Which is not part of a team at all, not even part of the product development group. It's just some external customer that you're trying to work with.
Yes, definitely. If we're talking about product, then I mentioned this PBR and sprint review. If you adopt LeSS, you already sort of inviting, customers, stakeholders into the room. Yeah, agree.
Thank you.
Good question, Jim. Yeah. Thank you, Louis. So, folks, we are almost quarter past the hour. I just want to be, even though Louis is pretty generous with his time, I want to be cognizant of his personal diary schedule. So I'm going to wrap this up. Also, people started dropping. Louis, I'm going to have your personal info, like your profile and contact info available, if you don't mind. So people that would like to follow up with you, they can do so directly. I don't need to be in between. And also, you can certainly, share with me more content as it comes, whatever you have on top of what I already have from you, and I'll be happy to syndicate it further. Personally, for me, I would like to thank you very much for coming at this early hour for you, a late hour for us. And this was a great, mind sharing. Clearly, some in-depth thinking on the subject. So I'm gonna have this recorded and hopefully released soon. And I wish everyone a great night. Thank you for joining. Enjoy the rest of your night. And Louis, for you, go ahead and carry on with your day. Happy to have you here, really. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. All right. Having me here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.